It was supposed to be the happiest day of Angela's life. Everything was going perfectly until her young daughter Claire tugged on her hand and whispered something in her ear. Angela froze, her smile vanished, and her eyes filled with pain. Moments later, she looked at the groom and slowly removed her ring, shocking everyone present. What did Claire say that ended the wedding so abruptly? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to the channel to find out what happened next. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Angela's house, casting a warm glow on the chaos of wedding preparations. The living room was filled with the soft hum of excitement, bridesmaids fluttering about in pastel dresses, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air, and a makeup artist dabbing the last touch of blush onto Angela's glowing cheeks. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the day she finally married the man she believed was her soulmate. Angela sat in front of a gilded mirror, her white dress flowing around her like a cloud. Her smile was radiant, reflecting the joy and hope she carried for the future. Guests were already arriving at the grand venue, marveling at the elegant decorations and the promise of a perfect celebration. The groom, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, greeted them with a charming grin, his demeanor confident and poised. But not everyone was swept up in the magic of the day. In the corner of the room, young Claire sat quietly on a plush chair, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. Her dark eyes, usually full of innocence, held a shadow of worry. She watched her mother carefully, the laughter and excitement swirling around them, unable to mask the uneasy feeling that had taken root in her heart. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. Claire lay in bed, her small frame curled under the covers. The warmth of her blanket usually comforted her, but tonight, sleep wouldn't come. A faint voice drifted through the walls, pulling her attention. It was muffled but unmistakable, low, tense, and sharp. She recognized it instantly. It was him. Her heart began to race as she strained to hear the words. She had heard the groom's voice late at night before, but this time it sounded different. There was no laughter, no light-hearted tone. Instead, his words carried a harsh edge, almost like a hiss. Claire's small hands clutched the edge of her blanket as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Unable to resist her curiosity, Claire slid out of bed, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. She tiptoed to her bedroom door and peeked into the hallway. The house was dark, but a faint glow seeped from the gap beneath the groom's door. She crept closer, her breath shallow, her ears straining for every word. "I told you to stop calling me this late," his voice snapped, the irritation clear. "Do you know what could happen if she found out?" Claire froze, her small frame pressed against the wall. The words were heavy with secrecy, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. Who was he talking to? And what was he so desperate to hide from her mother? As the conversation continued, Claire could hear the tension rising in his voice. There was a pause, and then he spoke again, this time more forcefully. "I'm doing everything I can. Just stay out of sight until this is over." The tone of his voice sent a chill down Claire's spine. She had never heard him speak this way before. Around her mother, he was always charming, always smiling. But now, in the privacy of his room, that facade had cracked, revealing something darker. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he talking to? What was he hiding? She thought about her mother, asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the man she was about to marry. Claire felt a heavy knot of guilt twist in her stomach. Should she tell her? Could she even explain what she had heard? It was all so confusing, so unsettling. Claire's small fingers brushed against the doorknob as she considered knocking, but fear held her back. She didn't know how he would react if he found her there. Slowly, she backed away, retreating to the safety of her room. She climbed back into bed, her heart still pounding, the echoes of his words replaying in her mind. As she stared at the ceiling, Claire tried to convince herself that it wasn't her place to interfere. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe there was an explanation. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. In the days that followed, Claire couldn't look at him the same way. His laughter seemed forced, his smiles hollow. Every time he spoke to her mother, Claire's stomach twisted with unease. She watched him closely, noticing things she had overlooked before, the way he checked his phone constantly, the way his voice dropped when he took calls in the other room. Claire felt trapped, torn between wanting to protect her mother and fearing the consequences of speaking up. The burden of the secret weighed heavily on her, growing with each passing day. She didn't know it yet, but that night's revelation was just the beginning of a truth that would shatter their lives. It was a bright afternoon, and the sun bathed the front yard in a golden glow. Claire sat on the porch steps, absently tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. She loved these quiet moments, where the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But her peace was interrupted by the low hum of an approaching car. She looked up just in time to see the sleek, black vehicle pull into the driveway. It was him, the groom. Claire frowned. He wasn't supposed to be here today. Her mother was out running errands, and she had assumed he was busy with wedding preparations. Intrigued, she stayed where she was, watching as he stepped out of the car, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. He was on his phone, speaking quickly, his words too low for her to hear. Then, the passenger door opened. A tall, fair-skinned blonde woman stepped out, her figure elegant in a fitted dress. She smiled at him, her lips curving in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate. Claire's heart sank as she watched them exchange a few words, their laughter ringing out softly in the warm afternoon air. The groom reached out, placing a hand lightly on the woman's arm, and leaned in closer, speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone. Claire's chest tightened. She couldn't look away, her small hands gripping the edge of the step as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The way he looked at the woman, the way he smiled at her, it wasn't the way someone should behave just days before marrying her mother. The blonde woman laughed, brushing her hair over her shoulder, and the groom mirrored her expression, his demeanor relaxed and unguarded. They didn't notice Claire sitting there, her wide eyes fixed on them. She felt like an intruder in a moment she wasn't supposed to see, yet she couldn't ignore the growing sense of betrayal curling in her chest. The realization hit her like a wave, this wasn't just a casual acquaintance. The way they moved, the way they seemed so at ease with each other, it was the behavior of two people who shared a connection much deeper than friendship. Claire's thoughts raced, a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Was this the person her mother was planning to spend the rest of her life with? For a moment, Claire considered running down the steps, confronting him and demanding answers. But fear held her back. She thought of her mother, how happy she had been lately, how her eyes sparkled whenever she spoke about the upcoming wedding. Claire didn't want to be the one to wipe that smile away, to replace her mother's joy with pain. But how could she stay silent? The memory of the groom's late-night phone calls resurfaced, his irritated tone, his secretive behavior. Now, seeing him here with this woman, the pieces started to fit together. He was hiding something, something big. And her mother deserved to know. Claire stayed on the porch as the groom and the blonde woman exchanged a quick embrace before parting ways. He got back into his car, the engine revving softly as he pulled out of the driveway, the woman waving after him. Claire watched until they were both out of sight, her heart pounding in her chest. As the silence returned, Claire sat frozen, her mind racing with questions. Should she tell her mother what she had seen? Would her mother even believe her? And if she did, what would happen next? The weight of the decision pressed down on her small shoulders, a heavy burden for someone so young to carry. Claire didn't know it then, but the choice she would make in the days to come would change everything. For now, all she could do was sit there, the image of the blonde woman and the groom burned into her memory, a secret she wasn't sure how to share. The days following Claire's discovery were a blur of conflicting emotions. She carried the weight of what she had seen and heard like a heavy stone in her chest. Every time she looked at her mother, a pang of guilt and fear coursed through her. Angela, radiant and glowing with happiness, was oblivious to the storm brewing in her young daughter's heart. Claire sat at the kitchen table one morning, poking at her cereal as Angela hummed softly, flipping through fabric samples for the wedding. The room was filled with warmth, the sunlight streaming through the window highlighting the joy etched on her mother's face. "What do you think of this one, sweetie?" Angela asked, holding up a swatch of delicate lace. Claire forced a smile, nodding absently. "It's pretty." Her voice betrayed none of the turmoil she felt inside, but her mind was screaming. How could she shatter this happiness? How could she tell her mother that the man she was about to marry, the man who made her laugh, who held her hand so tenderly, wasn't who he seemed to be? Each time Claire considered speaking up, a wave of doubt stopped her. What if her mother didn't believe her? What if Angela dismissed her concerns as childish misunderstandings? The thought of being brushed aside was almost as painful as the truth itself. And then there was the fear of how her mother might react if she did believe her. Would it break Angela's heart? Would it destroy the future she had been so excited to build? Claire had never seen her mother this happy before. Angela had worked so hard to rebuild their lives after her divorce, and now, she finally seemed at peace. Every detail of the wedding was a testament to her hope for a new beginning. How could Claire be the one to take that away? Yet, as much as Claire hesitated, she couldn't ignore the simmering resentment she felt toward the groom. His presence in their home, his fake smiles and syrupy compliments, grated on her nerves. Each time he laughed with Angela, each time he made a show of being the perfect partner, Claire felt a spark of anger flare inside her. She thought about the blonde woman in the driveway, the late-night phone calls, the dismissive tone he used when he thought no one was listening. How could someone so deceptive stand there and pretend to love her mother? And how could she stay silent, knowing the truth? Claire began noticing more things about him, little behaviors that fed her suspicions. He would glance at his phone during dinner, his expression shifting subtly when a message came through. He'd excuse himself to take calls outside, his voice faint but hurried. Once, Claire caught him scrolling through photos on his phone, and though he quickly locked the screen when he noticed her, she was certain she had seen the blonde woman's face among them. The more she observed, the more the weight on her chest grew. She avoided his gaze, her responses to his questions short and clipped. Angela noticed her daughter's distance but brushed it off as pre-wedding jitters. "Everything's changing so fast," Angela said one evening as they curled up on the couch. "It's a lot to take in, I know. But you'll see, this is going to be so good for us." Claire nodded, biting her lip. Her mother's optimism only deepened her guilt. How could she be the one to crush this dream? The days ticked closer to the wedding, and Claire knew she couldn't stay silent forever. The thought of her mother standing at the altar, pledging her life to someone who didn't deserve it, filled Claire with dread. But the words wouldn't come. Each time she opened her mouth to speak, fear clamped down, leaving her silent. As she lay in bed one night, staring at the ceiling, Claire whispered to herself, "What if I'm wrong? What if I'm ruining everything for no reason?" But deep down, she knew she wasn't wrong. The memories of the groom's secretive phone calls, the blonde woman's laughter, and his disdainful remarks were too vivid, too real to dismiss. She couldn't ignore the truth, no matter how much she wanted to. Claire made a silent promise to herself that night. If no one else would protect her mother, she would. Even if it meant risking Angela's anger, even if it meant destroying the wedding, Claire would do whatever it took to make her see the truth. The weight of that decision pressed heavily on her small shoulders, but she clung to one thought: her mother deserved better. The change in his demeanor was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Claire noticed it in the way that Groom's smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he spoke to her, or how his tone turned clipped whenever she asked him a question. What had once seemed like polite disinterest now felt more deliberate, as though he were holding back something sharper. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, the groom made his first cutting remark. Angela was recounting a story about Claire's recent school project, her voice full of pride. She worked so hard on it, Angela said, ruffling Claire's hair affectionately. Her teacher said it was one of the best in the class. The groom leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine. His gaze flicked to Claire, and a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Well, I suppose hard work is the only way to make up for other disadvantages. Claire froze, her fork hovering in midair. Angela didn't seem to catch the undertone in his words, laughing lightly and continuing the conversation. But Claire felt the sting. She glanced at him, hoping for some sign that she had misinterpreted, but his expression was unreadable, his attention already elsewhere. As the days went on, his comments became less veiled. One afternoon, Angela asked Claire to join them in the living room to discuss wedding details. Claire reluctantly sat down, flipping through a magazine as Angela chatted excitedly about flower arrangements. The groom glanced at her over the rim of his glass and said, "Do you even care about these things? I didn't think this was your kind of event." The room fell silent for a moment. Angela furrowed her brow, giving him a puzzled look. "What do you mean by that?" He shrugged, offering a half-smile. "I just mean, she's a kid. Kids don't usually care about this kind of stuff." Claire knew he wasn't talking about her age. His tone, his choice of words, they all carried an edge that made her feel small, unwelcome, and out of place. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he seemed to avoid being near her, the way he never looked directly at her when he spoke. When Angela wasn't around, his hostility became even clearer. One evening, as Claire sat in the kitchen working on her homework, he walked in and muttered under his breath, "You always seem to be in the way." Claire's cheeks flushed, and she looked down, pretending not to hear him. But the words echoed in her mind long after he left the room. Each comment, each look, each dismissive gesture chipped away at her sense of safety in her own home. The final straw came a few days before the wedding. Angela had invited a few friends over to help with the preparations, and Claire was tasked with handing out snacks. As she carried a tray of cookies into the living room, the groom glanced at her and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should be careful with those. You wouldn't want to overdo it." The room went quiet. Angela frowned, but before she could say anything, Claire set the tray down and walked out, her head held high despite the tears welling in her eyes. She locked herself in her room, her small hands clenched into fists. The humiliation was too much. His words weren't just mean, they were meant to remind her that, in his eyes, she didn't belong. Not in his life, not in his family, not anywhere. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Claire made a decision. She couldn't let her mother marry a man who treated her like this. She couldn't stay silent any longer, knowing the truth about who he was and what he thought of her. Her heart ached at the thought of hurting her mother, of shattering the happiness Angela had worked so hard to find. But Claire knew that staying quiet would hurt even more. This wasn't just about her, it was about protecting her mother from a man who didn't deserve her love. The next time he tried to dismiss her, to humiliate her, she wouldn't shrink away. She would find her voice. And she would tell her mother the truth before it was too late. Claire glanced at the clock on her nightstand. Midnight. The house was still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She got up and padded quietly to her desk, pulling out a notebook and a pen. If she couldn't find the words to say out loud, maybe writing them down would help her organize her thoughts. She began to scribble furiously, the emotions pouring out of her onto the page. She wrote about the blonde woman, about the late-night phone calls, about the way he looked at her like she didn't belong. She wrote about the things Angela hadn't seen, the moments that revealed the groom's true nature. And then she wrote the hardest part, the reason why she had to tell her mother everything, even if it ruined the wedding. "Because you deserve better," Claire wrote, her handwriting shaky but determined. "You deserve someone who loves you and respects you and me. And he's not that person." When Claire finished writing, she set the notebook aside and sat quietly for a moment. Her heart was pounding, but a sense of calm began to settle over her. She knew what she had to do, and there was no turning back. Tomorrow, before the vows were spoken, before it was too late, she would tell her mother the truth. She climbed back into bed, clutching the pillow tightly to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity, even as the uncertainty of what would come next loomed large. She didn't know how her mother would react, or if she would even believe her. But Claire wasn't doing this for herself. She was doing it to protect the person she loved most in the world. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Claire whispered a silent promise, "Mom, I'll make sure you're happy. Even if it means breaking your heart now to save it later." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the sun casting golden rays over the manicured gardens of the venue. Guests arrived in a steady stream, dressed in elegant attire and carrying gifts wrapped in shiny paper. The air buzzed with excitement, and soft music played from a quartet station near the flower-laden arch where the ceremony would take place. Angela was radiant, her white gown shimmering as she moved among the final touches, greeting guests and stealing glances at her soon-to-be husband. To everyone around her, she seemed like the picture of joy, her laughter light and carefree. But Claire, standing quietly at her side, felt none of the excitement. Instead, her chest tightened with every passing moment, the secret she carried weighing heavier with each step her mother took toward the altar. As the processional music began, the guests rose to their feet, their eyes fixed on Angela as she walked down the aisle. She moved with grace, her veil billowing softly in the breeze. Claire walked beside her, holding the bouquet tightly, her small fingers trembling as she glanced up at her mother's glowing face. Angela reached out and gave her a reassuring squeeze, mistaking Claire's nervousness for the jitters of a child overwhelmed by the grandeur of the moment. The groom stood at the altar, his expression a practiced blend of charm and anticipation. To the guests, he appeared every bit the devoted fiancé, but Claire saw through the facade. She saw the coldness in his eyes when he glanced at her, the barely concealed annoyance he tried to hide beneath a smile. It was enough to make her heart pound in her chest, the resolve she had built the night before tightening her throat. As they reached the altar, Angela turned to give Claire a quick kiss on the forehead before stepping forward. It was now or never. Claire's small hand darted out, tugging on the edge of Angela's gown. Angela paused, glancing down with a puzzled expression. The music faded into the background as Claire leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I have to tell you something," Claire said, her tone urgent and shaky. "Please don't marry him." Angela's smile faltered, confusion and concern flickering across her face. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" she whispered back, glancing nervously at the crowd, who were watching intently. Claire swallowed hard, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's not who you think he is. I've seen him with another woman. I've heard him on the phone at night, and he doesn't like me. He says awful things." Angela's expression changed instantly. Her joy evaporated, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and fear. She stared at Claire, trying to process her words, as a murmur rippled through the guests. The groom shifted uneasily at the altar, his charming smile faltering as he noticed the shift in Angela's demeanor. "What do you mean?" Angela asked, her voice trembling. "Claire, this isn't the time." But Claire shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't keep it inside anymore, Mom. Please, just listen to me." Angela's gaze darted between Claire and the groom, the weight of her daughter's words sinking in. She thought about the late nights when he would disappear into another room to take calls, the moments when he seemed distracted or evasive. She remembered the fleeting looks of annoyance he gave Claire when he thought no one was watching. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed began to fit together. The groom stepped forward, his voice smooth but tinged with unease. "Angela, what's going on? Is everything all right?" Angela held up a hand, silencing him. Her mind raced as she looked at Claire, her daughter's tear-streaked face filled with desperation and honesty. Slowly, Angela turned back to the groom, her expression hardening. "Is there something you need to tell me?" she asked, her voice calm but icy. The groom's mask slipped for a moment, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "Angela, this is ridiculous. She's just a kid." "She's my daughter," Angela snapped, her voice firm. The guests gasped softly, the tension in the air palpable. Angela's hand trembled as she reached for the ring on her finger. The weight of Claire's words echoed in her mind, drowning out the whispers of the stunned guests and the soft hum of the music still lingering in the air. Her vision blurred, not from tears but from the overwhelming realization that the man standing before her, the man she had trusted, loved, and dreamed of building a life with, was not who she thought he was. She turned to face the groom, her eyes piercing and unreadable. For a fleeting moment, he tried to meet her gaze with his usual charming smile, but it faltered under the weight of her silence. Angela's fingers hesitated on the ring for what felt like an eternity, but the clarity in her heart was undeniable. With a firm tug, she slid the ring off and held it out between them. The simple band, once a symbol of hope and love, now felt like a lie in her palm. "I can't do this," Angela said, her voice steady but laced with pain. The guests gasped audibly, a ripple of shock moving through the seated crowd. A murmur began, growing louder with every passing second as the weight of Angela's words sank in. The groom's face twisted with disbelief, his confident facade cracking. "Angela, what are you talking about?" he said, stepping closer to her. His tone was a mix of confusion and panic, as though he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Angela didn't flinch. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, "I won't marry a man who lies, who keeps secrets, and who doesn't respect my daughter. Claire told me everything, and I believe her." His eyes darted to Claire, who stood just behind Angela, her small hands clutching the fabric of her mother's dress. He let out a harsh laugh, his panic morphing into defensiveness. "She's a child, Angela. She doesn't understand what she's saying." Angela's jaw tightened. "What she understands," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "is that you've shown her who you truly are. And now, so have I." The groom's face reddened, and he turned to the crowd, his arms raised as though pleading for their understanding. "This is ridiculous. She's ruining everything over nothing, over childish misunderstandings and wild accusations." But the audience wasn't on his side. The guests whispered among themselves, their glances shifting between Angela's resolute stance and the groom's floundering defense. The perfect image he had so carefully cultivated was falling apart, piece by piece. Angela looked at him one last time, her gaze steady and unyielding. "This isn't about Claire ruining anything," she said firmly. "This is about you. And I won't let you hurt me or my daughter anymore." With that, she placed the ring in his hand and stepped back, creating a chasm between them that no words could bridge. The room buzzed with disbelief as Angela turned, her hand reaching for Claire's. The little girl's eyes brimmed with tears, not of sadness, but of relief. Together, they began walking back down the aisle, their steps slow and deliberate. The groom called after her, his voice breaking. "Angela! Don't do this. We can fix this." But she didn't turn back. Her grip on Claire's hand tightened as they exited the ceremony, the sunlight spilling over them as they stepped outside. In the quiet of the garden outside, Angela knelt down and cupped Claire's face in her hands. "You were so brave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry you had to carry this on your own." Claire threw her arms around her mother's neck, her small body shaking with relief. "I didn't want to ruin your day, Mom," she said through her tears. "But I couldn't let you marry him." Angela hugged her tightly, her own tears finally spilling over. "You didn't ruin anything," she said softly. "You saved me. You saved us." Inside, the groom remained at the altar, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. The whispers of the guests surrounded him, their glances filled with judgment and curiosity. The man who had stood so confidently just moments ago now seemed small, his carefully constructed image shattered. Angela and Claire had left the chaos behind, stepping into a new chapter together. It wasn't the day Angela had imagined, but it was the beginning of something far more important, a future built on truth, love, and trust. For the first time in weeks, Angela felt free. The aftermath of the wedding that never was rippled through the community like a shockwave. What had started as a joyous celebration ended in a public unraveling that left the groom standing alone at the altar, his carefully curated image shattered before hundreds of witnesses. The whispers began immediately, weeding their way through the guests as they filed out of the venue in stunned silence. The groom, still clutching the ring Angela had placed in his hand, stood frozen, his face pale and his confidence gone. The charm and composure he had worn like armor were stripped away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Social media buzzed with posts from guests who couldn't resist sharing what they had seen. "Did you hear what happened at Angela's wedding?" became the question on everyone's lips. The groom's name was mentioned with disdain, his actions dissected and condemned by everyone from mutual friends to casual acquaintances. "Imagine lying to her and treating her daughter like that," one post read. "He deserved everything he got." The groom quickly became the subject of scorn, his betrayal and condescending behavior laid bare for all to see. People who had once admired his polished persona now distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with a man who had been so thoroughly exposed. At work, the groom found himself isolated. Colleagues who had previously greeted him with friendly smiles now avoided eye contact. Meetings were colder, conversations shorter. He overheard whispers in the break room, the tone unmistakably mocking. "Can you believe he thought he'd get away with it?" one coworker murmured. "Serves him right," another replied. Even his closest friends began pulling away, no longer able to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one whose actions had come to light. Invitations to events dried up, and his phone, once buzzing with messages, now lay silent. The groom's humiliation wasn't limited to his personal and professional circles. The story reached beyond the wedding guests, spilling into the broader community. His once pristine reputation was now a tarnished reminder of his deceit and arrogance. Strangers recognized him in public, their glances sharp and judgmental. He couldn't escape the shadow of what had happened, and for the first time, he began to understand the weight of his actions. At night, alone in his now empty apartment, he replayed the scene at the altar in his mind, the moment Angela had walked away, hand in hand with her daughter. Regret gnawed at him, not just for being caught, but for the choices that had led him there. While the groom wallowed in his self-made downfall, Angela began the difficult process of rebuilding her life. At first, the pain was sharp and raw, the betrayal cutting deeper than she expected. But every time she felt herself falter, she looked at Claire, whose courage had saved her from a lifetime of misery. The mother and daughter found strength in each other. Angela threw herself into creating a life where Claire would feel safe and valued. She returned to her hobbies, rediscovered friendships she had neglected, and found joy in the little moments: Sunday mornings spent baking with Claire, quiet evenings reading together. Word of Angela's strength spread through the community. People admired her resilience, inspired by her decision to stand up for herself and her daughter. She became a source of quiet inspiration, proving that walking away from something toxic was an act of courage, not defeat. One afternoon, Angela and Claire walked through the park, the sunlight filtering through the trees. They laughed and talked, the weight of the past beginning to lift. For the first time in weeks, Angela felt a sense of peace, a glimmer of hope for the future. Claire looked up at her and smiled. "Are you happy, Mom?" Angela paused, brushing a strand of hair from Claire's face. "I'm getting there," she said softly. "And it's all because of you." They walked on, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of betrayal behind. The groom's humiliation and regret were no longer their concern. Angela and Claire had reclaimed their lives, their bond stronger than ever. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but together they could face whatever came next. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of their small but cozy home, casting a golden glow over the space that now felt like a sanctuary. Angela sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea as Claire worked on a colorful drawing, her face lit with focus and contentment. It had been weeks since the wedding that wasn't, and while the road to this moment had been rocky, the sense of peace that now filled their lives was undeniable. Angela glanced at her daughter and smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. Claire's bravery had saved her from a life built on lies and deceit. The weight of what could have been was no longer something Angela carried. Instead, she felt lighter, freer, and more confident in her ability to navigate life's challenges. Their days now were filled with simple joys. Angela found herself rediscovering passions she had long set aside. She started painting again, her canvases coming alive with vibrant colors that mirrored the new energy in her life. Claire, ever curious and full of life, had become her greatest source of inspiration. Together, they turned their home into a space that reflected their bond, filled with laughter, creativity, and an unshakable sense of safety. Angela made it a point to talk openly with Claire about everything, encouraging her to express her feelings and reminding her every day of her worth. She wanted her daughter to grow up knowing that her voice mattered and that love was never an excuse to tolerate disrespect or dishonesty. Word of their story spread beyond the confines of their small neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to Angela, moved by her decision to prioritize herself and her daughter. Invitations to community events poured in, and Angela found herself speaking at gatherings about the importance of self-respect, the power of truth, and the courage it takes to stand up against injustice. Claire, too, became a beacon of inspiration. Her teachers noticed her newfound confidence, and her classmates admired her strength. She carried herself with a quiet pride, knowing that she had played a pivotal role in protecting her family. Angela often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pain of betrayal and humiliation was still a scar, but it served as a reminder of the importance of truth. She realized that their story wasn't just about walking away from a toxic relationship, it was about embracing the power of honesty and the resilience of love. Her message resonated with others who were facing their own battles. People shared their struggles with her, seeking advice or simply expressing gratitude for her courage. Angela's story became a symbol of hope, proving that it was possible to break free from cycles of pain and build something better. As the months passed, Angela and Claire grew stronger together. They began planning small trips, exploring new hobbies, and setting goals for the future. Angela decided to start a blog, sharing her journey with a wider audience and offering support to those who felt trapped in similar situations. Claire, inspired by her mother's creativity, began writing stories of her own, dreaming of one day publishing a book. Their new chapter wasn't without its challenges, but they faced them head-on, armed with the lessons they had learned. They knew that life would always have its difficulties, but together, they were unstoppable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Angela turned to Claire and said, "I'm proud of us. We've come so far." Claire smiled, leaning against her mother. "We're a good team," she replied. Angela nodded, her heart full. "Yes, we are. And we're just getting started." Their story is a reminder that truth and love can overcome even the deepest wounds. Angela and Claire prove that no relationship, romantic or otherwise, is worth sacrificing your dignity, your peace, or your self-respect. Their journey inspired those around them to stand up for themselves, to seek out honesty, and to find the courage to walk away from what doesn't serve them. What do you think of Angela and Claire's story? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of courage, love, and resilience. Together, we can celebrate the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit.